So I've localized this to French, .French, okay? So now we have localization for that. And so now when we run, okay, so when we run now, we still have some stuff left to localize here, right? You can see that these things are still in English. But if we go over to here, look at this. États-Unis, we already saw that from last time. I forgot to mention that maybe, but the maps part of it is all localized. And when we go over here, we have all these dots, and now we have these strings also localized, right? The add photo here, okay. Okay, and if we went through and checked them all the other ones would all have the dots too. So we're making good progress here in terms of our localization. Couple of things though, not localized here. One, my photos, right? In French, that would be, I don't know, mes photos or something, I don't know. Actually, it would be m.y, p.h. Okay, so we would need to localize that. Where is that? That is here in photographers. Actually, no, that's in, sorry, that's in core data, photographer create, all right? So that's just a literal string. So we would probably localize this with ns localized string. Not going to do it because I've already showed you how to do that. What else do we have that's not localized? This little line right here, 0 photos. Okay, that's actually probably correct in real French. I think photo is in French, it's photo as well. But we want to make sure that was localizable. That's another reason to do the dot thing, because it would be obvious that there's no dots here. Whereas if you're just checking it with French, you'd be like, oh yeah, that's localized. But in fact, it's not. So where is that? That's down here in, that's the ones in photographers. You can see it's just a string with format thing here for table view. So we would want to do another ns localized string here, right? And then there's one other thing that's in English. This word photographer right here. Now, you might be surprised, where does this come from? This is actually being provided by Core Data Table View Controller. Okay, that class that we gave you many weeks ago. And what happens here is Core Data Table View Controller, when you set a fetch results controller, it checks to see if your table view has a title. And if it doesn't have a title, then it sets the title to be the entity name, photographer or photo. Okay? Now, this is an interesting one to localize because I can't use ns localized string here. Everyone understand why? Because ns localized string, all the arguments have to be literals, @ quote something. So how am I going to localize this? Well, we can go one level below the ns localized string to the bundle thing. So let's take this string. I'm going to take it out of there. I'm going to go ns bundle, main bundle, localized string for key. Okay, this can be a variable, so I'm going to make it be that entity name. The value, this is the default value if it can't find that string. So I'll make that be the entity name. And then table, this is the strings table to look in. I'm going to call it entities. So this is a new strings table that I'm going to have to invent. So how do I invent this strings table? I can't use that genstrings thing because all genstrings does is look at ns localized string, those macros. Okay, how am I going to make a strings file for this? Well, I'm going to use new file. So when you do new file, if you go down here to resource, you see resource right here, you'll see that there is strings file. So I'm going to create a new file, call it strings file. I'm going to call it entities. That's what I said I called it. I'm going to put it where I keep my view stuff. Okay, and I hit create. It makes it. It's right here, entities.string. I'm going to make it localizable, same way as I did the other strings file. That'll be our base, which is nothing. Okay, and then I can say, well, I don't need an English localization because the names of the entities in the database are in English, so I don't need one. But French, I do. Okay, so I'm going to make a French one. Now if we go over here and look at French, here it is. And now I can just say photographer equals photographer, and we'll put our dots in here. Dot, 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 dot. Whoops. Oh. Dot. Okay, so we've translated that to French. And now when we run, we'll see that we get photographer along the top here. Okay, so that's an example of where you need to localize by actually calling the bundle thing as opposed to ns localized string. Question?
When you did the macro for the ns localized, you declared that in a .m file and you did a gen command line to a .m. if I have two .m with the same string, could I put that in the .h?
Yeah, great question. So the question is, when I did these NS localized strings here, I put them in my .m, photo viewer controller.m. See, I put them all right in here. Could I put these in a .h somewhere and then import them and share them between two? And the answer is absolutely you can do that. When you do gen strings, it's legal to put a .h file there. In fact, gen strings will look in any file you want, right? So yes, you can do that. All right. So that's it for localization. I mean, I'm just kind of skimming the surface of localization, but I think this is a really important one to know if you're going to ship a product on the App Store, because you can really open up your market by having it localized. It's not that expensive to have these strings files localized. Really, more of your cost sometimes is QAing it. You got to put something that's in French in front of French users and make sure that it uses the right idioms and that it's understandable and that, you know, and if you get a good localization company doing the localization for you, they'll do the QA as well and make sure that, you know, it's actually user tested as well. Okay? All right, back to the slides. All right. Okay, so the last thing we're going to talk about here is settings, okay? So settings allows you to add user interface for your application into the general settings app. So you can see the screen capture at the bottom there. That's the general settings app. And if you scroll down towards the bottom of the very first page of settings, you can see all these other apps like Maps and Safari and even third-party apps, Twitter, Facebook, Flickr, whatever. Actually, I'm not sure those are third-party apps. They're probably iOS 7's integration to those things. But your apps could appear at the bottom of this list. And when you click on one of those apps, it goes to the next view here, and I've shown two different ones, one for Maps and one for Safari, and you can see that there's some UI in there. We got some switches, we can choose from a predefined list of things, like where it says search engine Google, you could click on that and have a list of things. You can also have sliders in here, you can group things, etc. So this UI you can build for your app and have the settings app do this. This UI is basically a UI on top of NS user defaults. Okay, so these things, all these things in the UI are setting NS user defaults. That's all they're doing, and that's how it's communicating with your app. Okay, so it's as simple as that. There's really not a lot of UI you can put in here. I'm not going to talk about all the things you can do. You can look in the documentation for that. But like I said, sliders, switches, text fields, typable text fields, and also selecting from lists are the main things. The way you add this to your app is in your app. Okay, you go into Xcode and you say new file, and then under resources you pick settings bundle. This is the same place we went to add a strings file a moment ago. Now we're going to do settings bundle. And when you do settings bundle, you'll get this little settings bundle added to your file navigation there. You can see it. And it's going to give you a default kind of an example bundle, which is really nice because it's a good starting point to get started and what can I do with this thing. All that UI that you're going to build, you don't build it in a storyboard, you don't build it with a graphical interface. You build it using a property list, okay? And this property list has well-defined keys and values, and these keys and values determine whether you're doing a text field or a slider or a grouping things or whatever. And so you can kind of see up here some of the property list things you can set to build this UI. So for example, what you see on screen, I'm going to show you what that looks like in the settings app, okay? So you see we've got a group is item 0, so this thing is going to be grouped. The name of the group is group, so it's going to say group at the top. And then we got a text field, a toggle switch, and a slider. You see items 1, 2, and 3. The text field there, uses an alphabetic keyboard. It doesn't do autocorrection, etc. The toggle switch, its title is enabled, so it's going to say enabled, and then there's going to be a toggle switch there. The slider looks like it goes from 0 to 1. And for all three of them, do you see how it says name underbar preference, enabled underbar preference, slider underbar preference in each of those three things? That's the NS user default that it's setting. Okay? I don't really like those names very much, but that's what it's setting. So what is this going to look like? What would this particular thing look like? Well, it would look like this. Okay? Grouped, name, enabled with a switch, and then a slider. Okay? So localization. Let's talk about localization settings. You got to have localization for settings. Otherwise, when a person is French, they're not going to understand how to do your settings. And it's done using strings files. And if you look inside the settings bundle, you'll see it comes with an en.lproj. A little bit of English bias there, I think. And in that en.lproj, it's going to be, actually, it might not even be English bias. It's possible that if you're developing this and you're French, it might create an fr.lproj for you. I'm not sure. I've never tried that. And then inside this strings file is every string that would appear in this UI that you're building with equals whatever it's supposed to be. Okay? So whatever's in that base P list we saw 2 slides ago, anything that would appear in the UI, you can just say it equals something else. And then you can have as many .lprojes as you want here, French.lproj, whatever. The bad thing is there's no way to go to the file inspector and hit localize. Okay? For some reason, they have not gotten around to having the settings bundle be localizable in Xcode. It's got the mechanism there, but there's no inspector UI to do it. So how do you localize this thing? How do I create an fr.lproj? And the answer is you're going to go to the Finder and find this settings bundle. You can actually do that from Xcode. I'll show you how to do that in the demo. Then you're going to right-click on the settings bundle and say Show Package Contents. And that's going to show you what's inside that settings bundle, which is going to look like this. And you're going to see the en.lproj there. And now you're going to manually create an fr.lproj. Okay, really nice support for it here. And usually I do this by taking the en.lproj and just copying and pasting it and then renaming it from en.lproj copy to fr.lproj. And then the root.strings that's inside there, that's what I would send off to my localizer. Okay? And that would do the equals thing for French. So let's see what this looks like in Bouncer. Okay, because Bouncer has some nice settings that we could set. And what I'm going to do is make it so the elasticity, you know, the bounciness of the bouncing ball is settable in settings. So right now we have the elasticity set at 1, which is kind of the maximum elasticity that it can have and still settle down. If we had more than 1, it would start getting faster and faster as it bounced off the walls, because it would be more than an equally elastic rebound. So we're going to make it so we can set that elasticity anywhere from 0 to 1. Okay, 0 would mean just kind of hits and dampens immediately. All right, so let's go get Bouncer. Bouncer, here's Bouncer. Okay, Bouncer has not changed since last it was posted. The elasticity is here, this elastic dynamic behavior, and you can see that we set it to 1, okay, by default right now. So we want to be able to set this elasticity from the settings app. So let's build the UI for it first, and then we'll have to change our code to use the NS user default that our UI is going to set. So to do the UI, we just do New File, go to the Resource section of iOS, Settings Bundle, same place we did Strings File, right here, Settings Bundle. Create the Settings Bundle. You can call the bundle whatever you want, doesn't really matter. I'm going to call it Settings. Here it is, here's the Settings Bundle. And this root.p list is what the bundle is. And you can see it has 4 items here. Again, group, text field, toggle switch, slider. Okay. So this, you get this every time you create a settings bundle, you get this one. Let's go ahead and see what this looks like. I'll do this over here. So here's our bouncer, and you can see it's got full elasticity. Bounces pretty good.